Sometimes life brings someone into your path who changes everything. Not because they tried to, not because they put on some performance, but because of who they are when no one is looking. And maybe you don't even realize it, but you might be that person for someone, the woman he can't let go of, the one who stays in the back of his mind long after the conversations fade and the days move on. Tonight, I want to talk about why that happens and why you shouldn't underestimate the quiet power you carry. Because when you're not like everyone else, you echo. Your authenticity cuts through the noise in a way most people don't even realize is possible anymore. In a world where everyone seems to be trying to outshine, outperform, or outperfect one another, you walk through life with this quiet certainty that you don't need to be anything other than who you are. And the strange thing is that simplicity, it's what makes you extraordinary. See, people forget how rare genuineness has become. Everywhere you look, you see filters, maybe not on faces, but definitely on personalities. People speak in rehearsed lines, trying to say what they think others want to hear. They chase attention like it's oxygen. They hide their bruises, bury their fears, and pretend they're untouched by the world. It's all noise, constant, heavy, exhausting noise. But you're different. You don't hide behind a mask. You don't polish your flaws until they sparkle. You don't twist yourself into versions you think will be easier to love. You show up, messy, human, honest, and there's something profoundly grounding about that. It's like walking into a storm and suddenly finding a patch of stillness, like the world settles for a moment around you. And that's why he can't forget you. It wasn't the way you looked, though he noticed that too. It wasn't the way you laughed, even though he probably replayed it more times than he'll admit. What stayed with him was the way you made everything feel real. You didn't speak to impress him. You didn't rush to fill the silences. You didn't force a connection. You just let things be what they were. And in a time where everyone is performing, your honesty hit him like a breath of cold air in a room that had gone stale. I remember once meeting someone who talked about her failures the same way people talk about weather, calmly, naturally, without shame. She told stories about things she'd lost, mistakes she'd made, lessons she'd scraped out of heartbreak and confusion. And the way she spoke, there was no self-pity, no need for validation, just truth. And that truth made everyone around her braver, more open, more present. She didn't realize the effect she had on people, and I suspect you don't either. But that's the thing about authentic people. They don't try to leave an impression. It just happens. He remembers how you didn't agree with him just to make things comfortable. You had your own thoughts, your own perspectives, your own way of looking at the world. And you weren't afraid to share them, even when they didn't line up with his. Most people avoid disagreement because they're afraid it'll make them less likable. But you weren't trying to be liked. You were trying to be honest. And that honesty, it challenged him, opened him, shook something loose inside of him. Maybe it was the way you admitted when you didn't know something. That small, simple sentence, "I'm not sure," carried more sincerity than all the polished speeches he'd heard from others. Or maybe it was the way you could be vulnerable without collapsing, strong without hardening, soft without losing your boundaries. You didn't hide your emotions. You didn't pretend you were invincible. You let him see you. Not the version you curated, but the version you lived with every day. And that level of realness, it's haunting in the most beautiful way. Authenticity creates connection, and connection creates memory. That's just how humans work. You can forget someone's face, you can forget their favorite song or the color of their eyes, but you don't forget the way someone made you feel, especially if they made you feel safe enough to be yourself. With you, he didn't have to perform, he didn't have to posture or pretend he had everything figured out. You created a space where he could breathe, where the truth didn't feel dangerous, where the world felt a little less heavy. Think about how rare that is. Studies show that the average person lies 1 to 2 times a day, not necessarily out of malice, but out of habit, fear, and social pressure. People lie to protect their image, to avoid conflict, to seem more interesting or put together. But someone who doesn't do that, someone who speaks with sincerity even when it's uncomfortable, that person becomes unforgettable because they offer something no one else does. Trust. Were that for him. You were the reminder that honesty still exists, that realness still has a pulse, that human connection doesn't have to be complicated or strategic. You didn't just speak truth, you lived it. And when a woman lives in her truth, she becomes the kind of memory that settles deep, the kind that resurfaces in quiet moments, the kind that tugs on a man's thoughts when he least expects it. You didn't just cut through the noise, you silenced it. And in that silence, he found a version of himself he hadn't met in a long time, a version that felt lighter, freer, more alive. People don't forget the person who helps them find clarity. They don't forget the person who makes them feel human again. Maybe he's tried to move on. Maybe he told himself it was just timing or circumstance or life being complicated, but somewhere in the back of his mind, he keeps drifting back to the way you made him feel, grounded, seen, understood without having to explain. Authenticity isn't flashy, it's not dramatic, it's not loud, but it leaves an imprint deeper than anything else. You were simply yourself, and that was the rarest thing of all. That's why he can't forget you. You bring calm to his chaos in a way you probably don't even recognize because you're not trying to. It's not something you perform or manufacture or put on like a persona. It's just built into the way you move through the world, the way you talk, the way you breathe through a moment instead of rushing past it. There's something in you that steadies a room, something quiet but unmistakable, like the moment just before dawn when the sky hasn't decided to be bright yet, but you can feel that light is coming. And for him, someone who spent years battling storms he rarely talks about, that kind of presence isn't just comforting, it's transformative. The truth is, most men carry a kind of chaos that doesn't show up on the surface. They go about their day holding responsibilities that stack like bricks on their shoulders, worries they never give voice to, expectations they feel they have to meet even when they're exhausted. They hide this behind jokes, behind distractions, behind trying to look like everything is fine when deep down, they're just trying not to drown in the flood of their own thoughts. They don't admit it because they're taught not to. They think showing it would make them weak or burdensome or somehow less capable. Then you walked into his life with this gentle rhythm, steady, slow, deliberate. And suddenly something inside him loosened, not because you tried to fix him, not because you offered solutions or grand advice, but because you listened, you were present. You didn't fill every silence, you let it breathe. And silence, when shared with someone who understands it, becomes a kind of healing. He noticed how your voice softens when someone's hurting, how you lean in just enough to show you care, but not so much that you smother. He noticed the way you make space for people's emotions like it's the most natural thing in the world. You don't get overwhelmed by feelings, yours or anyone else's. You let them move through, like waves, acknowledging them without judgment. And for someone who's had to hide so much of what he feels, that was a revelation. There's a moment he probably thinks about more often than he admits. Maybe it was the day he was frustrated about something small but heavy, work stress, family tension, one of those days when everything feels off. He didn't tell you the details, just shrugged and said, "I'm fine." And instead of pushing, instead of demanding or prying, you simply looked at him with that soft, knowing expression, like you could see every unspoken word. You said something simple, something quiet like, "You don't have to be fine right now." And even if he didn't respond, even if he laughed it off, something in him cracked open, not in a painful way, but in a freeing one. He may not have realized it at the time, but that was a moment he felt seen, not for who he pretended to be, but for who he really was. That kind of recognition sinks deep. It becomes a memory that doesn't fade. You were never loud, you never demanded attention, you never tried to dominate his world. Instead, you became the soft place at the edge of it, the place he wandered to when everything felt too heavy, and you didn't even know you were doing it. That's the beauty of it. Your peace wasn't a performance, it was your natural state. It came from your empathy, your patience, your ability to sit with discomfort without trying to outrun it. You have this emotional steadiness that feels like home. People like you are rare. Most people want to fix or advise or react quickly, but you respond slowly, thoughtfully, with intentionality. You don't panic when someone else is panicking. You don't escalate a moment, you diffuse it. Your energy settles instead of spiraling. You bring clarity instead of confusion. And in a world that's always rushing, always shouting, always demanding more, your calm stands out like a lighthouse. There's research showing that emotional stability in one partner has a measurable effect on the nervous system of the other. Heart rates sink, breathing aligns, stress levels drop. The body literally finds safety in the presence of someone who carries themselves the way you do. And even though you may not know this, he felt that physiological shift around you. His body relaxed, his mind slowed down, his guard lowered. It wasn't a choice, it was a response. Think about that. You didn't calm him, your presence did. The way your eyes softened when he was frustrated, the steady, patient way you spoke, the feeling that you were listening not just to his words, but to the spaces between them, the way you didn't flinch from his darkness but didn't romanticize it either. You simply accepted it as part of him. Chaos doesn't disappear because someone says the right thing. Chaos quiets when someone finally feels safe. And that's what you gave him, safety. A place where he didn't have to be on, a place where he didn't have to perform strength, a place where he didn't feel like he needed to apologize for being human. He may never articulate it, he may never tell you outright, but he remembers the moments when you brought him back to himself, the way you could guide him out of emotional storms without saying much at all, the way you'd place your hand on his arm or shoulder with a kind of gentleness that felt wise, ancient almost. The way your presence made everything feel slower, less urgent, more manageable. You became the quiet in his noise, the clarity in his confusion, the breath he forgot he was holding. And that kind of presence doesn't just linger, it becomes unforgettable. It becomes something he compares every other connection to, not in a way that diminishes others, but in a way that reminds him what inner peace feels like. Calm isn't small, calm isn't passive, calm isn't weak. Calm is strength wrapped in softness. Calm is the ability to feel deeply without drowning. Calm is understanding without absorbing. Calm is compassion with boundaries. And you embody that instinctively. You didn't fix his chaos. You just didn't add to it. You didn't silence his storm. You just helped him find the eye of it. You didn't rescue him. You reminded him he wasn't alone. That's why he can't forget you. You weren't a moment of escape. You were a moment of peace. You challenge him in a way that makes him better. And it's not the loud, aggressive kind of challenge the world usually celebrates. It's something quieter, steadier, more anchored in truth. It's the kind of challenge that doesn't break a person down, it builds them. You push him without pushing against him. You encourage him without making him feel small. You hold up a mirror, but you do it with a gentleness that makes him want to look instead of turn away. That balance you have, strength woven into softness, changes people. It changed him. Most men grow up believing they have to be self-made, that they have to figure everything out alone, that admitting uncertainty means admitting defeat. So they move through life carrying their doubts like stones in their pockets, pretending they don't feel the weight. They don't often meet someone who sees through that facade, who sees the pieces they're still trying to glue together. But you did, and instead of judging him, instead of pointing out his flaws with cold bluntness, you showed him what he could be, not by lecturing, not by demanding, but by believing. There's a kind of magic in being believed in. It sounds so simple, but very few people have ever experienced it genuinely. You became the person who looked at him not just for who he was, but for who he could become. You didn't sugarcoat things, you didn't flatter him to keep the peace, and you didn't pretend issues didn't exist just to avoid discomfort. You told the truth, not harshly, not with anger, with clarity. Maybe you told him something as simple as, "I know you're capable of more than this." Maybe you said it during a moment when he was ready to give up, on a dream, on himself, on becoming the version of the man he used to imagine. And even if he didn't say much in that moment, he felt it. There's a shift that happens when someone believes in you. You stand a little straighter, you breathe a little deeper, you try harder, not because you're trying to impress them, but because you want to rise into the person they already see. You didn't challenge him through criticism, you challenged him through expectation. through the way you refused to let him shrink, through the way you didn't let him retreat into old habits just because they were comfortable. You didn't nag, you inspired. You didn't push, you guided. You didn't demand change, you illuminated the path toward it. And because your challenge came from love rather than ego, it never felt like an attack. It felt like an invitation. There's a moment he probably thinks about in the quiet when the world slows down and the truth is harder to avoid. Maybe it was the time he told you he wanted to do something, start a project, pursue a passion, fix a bad pattern, and you looked at him with this subtle, knowing smile and asked, "So what's stopping you?" You didn't say it sarcastically. You didn't say it with judgment. You said it with confidence. Confidence in him. Confidence that he was capable. And that question stuck with him. It echoed. Most people avoid challenging their partners because they're afraid of conflict, afraid of pushing too hard, afraid of losing the relationship. But what you did was different. Your challenge wasn't about control. It wasn't about being right. It wasn't about changing him into someone you preferred. It was about calling forward the best pieces of him, the ones he had buried under fear or doubt or routine. That's why it worked. You weren't trying to reshape him. You were trying to remind him. Real challenge, the kind that transforms, requires courage from both sides. It takes courage to speak honestly and courage to receive honesty. And you brought both to the table. You didn't shy away from the conversations most people avoid. You didn't gloss over the uncomfortable truths. You didn't let problems fester in silence. You faced things calmly, directly, kindly. That kind of honesty can shake a person in the best way. There's a quiet power in your ability to say, "I love you, and I know you can do better." Not as a threat, not as an ultimatum, but as a truth spoken from someone who wants to see him rise, not for you, but for himself. You believed in his potential, even when he struggled to see it. Maybe there was a moment when he made a mistake, not a small one, but one that could have pushed you away. And instead of walking out, instead of closing off, you looked him in the eyes and gave him the chance to be accountable. You didn't enable him. You didn't sweep it under the rug. You didn't pretend it didn't hurt you. You simply said something like, "You're better than this. I know you are." And that hit him harder than any anger could have, because you weren't excusing him. You were trusting him to grow. We remember the people who held us to a higher standard without making us feel unworthy. We remember the people who didn't let us stay small. We remember the people who challenged us with love rather than frustration. That kind of influence doesn't fade. And he didn't just feel challenged mentally. He felt challenged emotionally, spiritually, in the depths of who he was. You challenged him to show up more fully, to communicate more honestly, to listen more deeply, to choose presence over distraction, to treat connection like something sacred instead of something disposable. You showed him, through your actions, what it looked like to be vulnerable without losing strength, to be honest without being harsh, to be kind without being naive. And that reflection changed him. It made him want to be better, not just appear better, be better. People often talk about love as comfort, but the truth is, the best love is also a catalyst. It wakes you up. It pushes you forward. It makes the parts of you that have gone quiet start speaking again. You became that spark for him. You challenged him in a way he didn't even know he needed. But once he experienced it, he knew he couldn't find it anywhere else. Because what you offered wasn't criticism. It was belief. What you gave wasn't pressure. It was possibility. What you asked for wasn't perfection. It was growth. And he will never forget the person who showed him the man he could become. You have a quiet strength most people never develop. It's not loud, not obvious, not the kind of strength that demands attention or fills a room with force. It's something subtler, deeper, steadier. It's the kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, but makes an impact simply by existing. The kind that grows from the inside out, shaped by everything you've survived and everything you have chosen to become. And the thing is, you don't walk around acting like you're strong. You don't boast about what you've overcome. You don't tell stories for sympathy. You don't try to make your hardships a badge or a burden. You carry your experiences the way a tree carries its rings, visible only when someone looks closely, evidence of storms weathered, seasons endured, roots that grew deeper when life tried to pull them out. Most people never cultivate that kind of resilience. They react to life, bounce between highs and lows, let circumstances shape who they are. But you've been shaped by something different. You've learned how to bend without breaking. You've learned how to stay soft in a world that wants to harden everyone. You've learned how to remain hopeful even when history gave you every reason not to be, and that's what makes your strength remarkable. It's not the strength of a hardened shield, it's the strength of a warm heartbeat that refuses to stop believing in better days. There's something profoundly powerful about that. He noticed it long before you ever realized he did. It wasn't the way you responded to the big moments. Anyone can rise when the world is watching. It was how you handled the small ones. The moments when plans fell apart, but you kept your composure. The moments when you were disappointed, but you didn't lash out. The moments when things were unfair, but you didn't let bitterness take root. The moments when life hurt you, yet you chose not to hurt others in return. That's strength, real strength. And it's so rare that when someone encounters it, they can't help but remember it. There's a story he probably still thinks about. Maybe it was a day when everything seemed to hit you at once. Bad news, a delay, a misunderstanding. One of those days that tests your patience from the moment you wake up. Anyone else would have exploded, shut down, or taken their frustration out on whoever was closest. But you didn't. You took a breath. You paused. You allowed yourself to feel the weight of it, but you didn't let it crush the goodness inside you. He watched that quiet resilience unfold, and even if he didn't say it aloud, he admired you deeply in that moment. Because quiet strength doesn't shout, it shows. You may not see it in yourself, but the people around you do. They see the way you stay grounded when others drift, the way you hold your composure when chaos tries to pull you apart, the way you're able to comfort people even when you're hurting inside, the way you show up for others without making noise about it, the way you keep choosing compassion even when compassion feels like the hardest choice. And he felt it in ways you may never know. Your strength made him feel safer, more anchored, not because you took on his problems or tried to fix him, but because your presence steadied something inside him. There's a unique kind of peace that comes from being near someone who has survived their storms without losing their softness. It inspires, it reassures, it reminds you that there's a way through your own storms too. But your quiet strength isn't just about endurance, it's also about boundaries. You've learned how to say no when something isn't right for you, even if it disappoints someone. You've learned how to walk away from situations that drain your spirit. You've learned how to prioritize your peace without guilt. That's one of the most difficult forms of strength, because it requires both self-awareness and self-respect. It's the kind of strength people often misinterpret at first, thinking you're distant or guarded, until they realize you're simply protecting what you've worked so hard to heal. And he respected you for that. He saw the difference between someone who pushes others away out of fear and someone who protects their heart because they finally understand its worth. You weren't closed off, you were selective, you weren't cold, you were careful, you weren't unreachable, you were intentional. And that subtle distinction made him admire you even more. You grew into yourself piece by piece, not through dramatic transformations, but through quiet choices. The choice to keep going when giving up would have been easier. The choice to trust again after being let down. The choice to love with depth even when past love left scars. The choice to be gentle when life tried to turn you hard. The choice to stay human in a world that rewards numbness. People don't forget someone like that. He couldn't forget you because your strength didn't overshadow him. It illuminated him. It didn't control him. It inspired him. It didn't compete with him. It complemented him. Your strength wasn't a wall, it was a foundation. And being around you made him want to build something better within himself. The world sees strength as loud, forceful, dominating. But the kind you have is different. It doesn't need recognition. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need to be proven. It's lived. It's embodied. It's woven into your silence, your patience, your kindness, your resilience. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need to prove your power for it to be real. You don't need to be unbreakable to be strong. You just have to stay open, stay kind, stay grounded, even when the world tests you. And that is exactly what you've done. So yes, he remembers you. He remembers your strength, not because it overwhelmed him, but because it humbled him, not because it stood in front of him, but because it stood beside him, not because it asked for anything, but because it gave everything without noise. Quiet strength is unforgettable, and you carry it with a grace most people will never learn. You're not unforgettable because you're trying to be. You're unforgettable because you're real, because you're rare, and because you brought something into his life he didn't know he was missing. And here's the part I want you to hold on to. Being different isn't a weakness. It's your power. It's the very thing that makes you impossible to replace. So don't dim it. Don't shrink it. Don't apologize for it. You're not like other women, and that's exactly why he can't let you go.